1492. So by 1492, Granada fell. But that's a 700-year reconquest. The Muslims say, oh, well, okay, we lost Spain, but we gained the Turkish peninsula. So we lost one peninsula, but we regained another. There's some truth to that. They were unsuccessful ultimately in Spain, and they became successful again by almost at the same time that they lost Spain, Constantinople fell. So it's interesting. It's just a by-point of history. And funnily enough, Columbus set off for America in 1492 as well. And one of the reasons was that a lot of the intolerance that the new Spanish authorities, harking back to Visigothic days and the old legislation even before the Muslims came, now put back with a vengeance after what was called the Reconquista. All this is known in Christian history as the Reconquista. The anti-Jewish and Muslim legislation was very severe, and people knew that it was happening, and so a lot of the financing of the Columbus expedition was by people who realized they were going to be treated harshly and expelled, Jewish people and others. And Jews, doctors and others were part of the Columbus crew. Jewish financing to some extent was involved in that. To look for a new place of haven somewhere else in another world, in the New World. Well, they found it, but it didn't turn out to be exactly quite that way. But there's some reason, I mean, you see the Columbus journals, as he's sailing out of the harbor on his voyage, he sees the expulsees, people who've been expelled from Spain in their ships going to North African places, Muslims that were being expelled and Jews that were being expelled. And in Spain, the Jews and the Muslims were considered to be allies. They cooperated with each other. I told you, even at the beginning of the Muslim invasion, the Muslims would leave the Jews behind in the towns as governors while they moved forward to do the fighting. And in fact, Jewish culture in Spain was called the Golden Age of Spain in the Jewish lore. It was all in Arabic. They wrote their poetry in Arabic. They wrote their philosophy in Arabic. And they thrived as Islamic culture thrived. And all their poetry resembles Arab, Spanish poetry. All their literature resembles Arab, Spanish literature. And it was a golden age of both groups cooperating with each other. But then the expulsion came. And you can say that actually more Jews left than Muslims. More Muslims were converted to modern Spanish than Jews for some reason. I can't. I've been reading articles that out here in New Mexico and Texas and other places, a lot of Hispanic background people are looking into their roots and doing DNA tests to see if they're Jewish. And a lot of them are turning out to be Jewish. Conversos, they're called. And they're very excited about that. There's a whole blood bank to see what their actual DNA looks like and things like that. And there's an article in the paper recently about that. So there are, particularly in New Mexico, a lot of reconversions to Judaism going on in these areas of people who, for some reason, have found their roots. But even before the Reconquista was complete, the Arabs, the Umayyads were overwhelmed by Berber dynasties from Morocco, because as they weakened, they called in help from Morocco, and two Berber dynasties. I don't want to bore you with them, but one was called the Almoravids, and the other one was called the Almohads. These were very extreme Berber Muslim dynasties. They were not popular in Spain. They came in, they were military sort of help. They overwhelmed the former very free Spanish culture that we'll see when we read in our books Ibn Hazm. We'll look at Ibn Hazm called The Perfume Necklace, or The Dove's Necklace. A book so exquisite, so poetic, so sensitive, that you'll see how high the Spanish Muslim culture had risen. Well, the Almohads and the Almoravids didn't have this kind of culture, and there was a clash right away. And Ibn Hazm, the one that we're going to read, was a representative of this, will even express this disappointment in the book. It's about love. He writes a book about love, which is totally unimaginable. It's courtly love. It's where the Christians get their idea of courtly love from. Not Courtney love, but courtly love. And you know, this courtly ethic, courtly love ethic from Spain moved into southern France, the Provençal area, and where it became the troubadour motif. So you got southern France being influenced by Spain, and the Muslim notion of courtly love that's evident in the Ibn Hazm type of literature. And in southern France then it became the troubadour singing about what? L'amour, 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 love, 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 which is where France got its reputation for being a love capital. But it actually came from Islamic Spain. And that moved then into Italy, and it became amore, amore, amore. And that gave rise to the sweet new poets in Italy. And guess who the biggest representative of that movement was? Dante. And Dante was the sweet new style. He and a poet called Guido Cavalcanti were the sweet new style, and they were influenced by the troubadour style, who in turn were influenced by the Muslim courtly love style that had already been going on in Spain for 200 or 300 years in the poetry and so on. And you know how Dante writes, if you know the Divine Comedy, about his love Beatrice. How many are familiar with that? And Beatrice is his heroine, but he meets Beatrice one day in walking on the streets of Florence. He just nods to her, but he never touches her. He never has any physical relationship to her. He only dreams about her. And for him, that's his heroine that he dreams about his whole life, and he makes her the hero of the Divine Comedy. This is courtly love with a vengeance. In other words, it's only an ideal that he's in love with, it's not a reality. And so that's the, by the way, I'm giving you the whole story of the Divine Comedy. You don't have to read it now, but you might, when you get a minute, take a look at those books. But it's all influenced by Muslim Spain. And in fact, Dante shows his knowledge of Muslim Spain. He actually mentions different Spanish cultural heroes like Averroes, the great Spanish philosopher, and others who he's familiar with through the translations that are going on in northern Spain and moving into southern France and Italy. Not only of Spanish Islamic works, but the Greeks then are being moved into Latin through translation mechanisms, sometimes into Hebrew, and then through other Hebrew co-religionists in France and Spain, in France and Italy, into Latin. There's another mechanism for the cultural movement. So the manuscripts that have been translated way back under the Abbasids in the 800s